Hello everybody, welcome back to the InTouch Machine Edition training video series. In this video we're going to cover the first of two drivers videos. So let's get started. What's the description? This course is just going to give you a basic understanding of how to configure drivers within InTouch Machine Edition, just to get you started. And upon completion of this course you should be able to insert a driver into your project, configure the main driver sheet and or the standard driver sheets, establish communications with a PLC or another controller or device, and understand the communications status fields. So just what is a driver? Communications driver is, in this case, related to InTouch Machine Edition. It's a DLL that contains specific information about the remote equipment and implements the communications protocol, or how to talk to the PLC, temperature controller, motion controller device, whatever it may be. We have drivers for dozens of common and not so common devices are all included within the package. And the drivers task/worksheet really allows you to define how you're going to communicate between the project and the remote equipment. It's kind of the glue that ties the InTouch Machine Edition tags to the remote device I/O points. So let's talk a little bit about this real quick before we create a project. The number of drivers in a project is not the same as the number of PLCs. What do I mean by that? A single driver can connect to multiple PLCs. You might have a connection to 2 or 3 or 6 or 10 or 16 different PLCs. The limit really depends on the PLC, the architecture, the network, things of that nature. But while you can have multiple drivers installed in your project, and that really depends on the nature of your license. The smallest of licenses may only allow you to have one driver installed, while some of the others may allow you to have 3 or 4 or 5, depending on the size of your license. So again, that depends on the number of your license. So when you get into multiple drivers, just wanted to point out that it's not the number of drivers that means the number of PLCs. It's how many PLCs can each driver connect to. So you can have multiple PLCs per driver. So let's go ahead and get started. What I'm going to do is bring up the development environment here, and I've already created a new project. But what I'm going to do here is insert a screen that's blank, and I'm just going to put a bar graph on here, and we'll start to see some more of this on future videos. But I'm going to apply a bar graph animation to this and put a tag in here called temperature. This tag doesn't exist yet, so when I hit enter it's going to ask me to create it. I'm just going to leave the defaults as integer and say OK here. Alright, so then the other thing maybe I want is a data display down below here that shows me the value of that tag called temperature. So I can put a text data link on here. And I'm not expecting you to watch exactly what I'm doing at this point, because I'm just creating the displays. I'll slow down when we get into the driver section a little bit more. Tie that to temperature as well, and we'll save this screen as main, and I'll come over here and right click on that and set that as startup. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the communications tab here, this COM tab, and go into drivers and right click on drivers and add remove drivers. You can also get to this here through the insert tab, go into communications and add remove driver. It's the same thing. So I'm going to go right here, add remove drivers. And for today I happen to have a Modbus Ethernet PLC connected, so I'm going to scroll down through this list of drivers, and to save myself some time I'm actually going to select any one of these in the list and hit the letter M on my keyboard. That'll jump me all the way down to the M's, and I know the Modbus TCP driver is just a short ways down from there. Another thing to note here, you can get to the communications manual via the help button here. This will open up a PDF that describes communications with that particular driver. Just a note that the driver manuals are separate from the technical reference. This way we can keep those updated separately, and we don't have to update the technical reference all the time. I'm going to minimize this and pull this off the screen. We're going to come back to that in a minute, and I'll show you another way to get to those manuals as well. But once we have that line selected, these are all the available drivers within InTouch Machine Edition, and now I'm going to select it or add it to my project. So this is now one of however many I can have based on my license count, and that depends on, again, the size of the license. Either it's 1 or 3 or 4 or 5 depending on your license. So in this case I'm just choosing one. I might allow multiple depending on the license size there. So I'm going to say OK. And the first thing you'll notice is now I have this driver, this Modbus Ethernet driver, and I can right click on this and get to some of the settings here. And some of these settings and advanced settings will be dependent upon the device that you have connected and things of that nature. And we'll talk a little bit about in the drivers 2 video this serial encapsulation. Essentially that lets you on a serial driver encapsulate the driver when it goes through, whether it be an Ethernet connection or a modem. It can basically make the connection kind of transparent and make it look like a giant long cable. So it's irrelevant as to the serial connection itself. So I will talk more about that in Drivers 2 video, but I wanted to show you that you can change some of these settings here. Now, when you first install the driver, you get this main driver sheet. There's another setup or another type of sheet called the standard driver sheet, and we'll configure that here in a minute. But we're going to start with this main driver sheet. I'm going to double click on it, and notice here you have this section up here at the top, which is the header, and then this section down here below, which is kind of the driver worksheet itself. We're going to start fairly simple, and I'm going to assume everybody knows something a little bit about either communications or Modbus or Modbus Ethernet in general. And I'm going to take that tag, that InTouch Machine Edition tag, which if I go off that cell and then double click on it, I can just choose it from the list. I don't have to retype it. And that particular PLC is at an IP address of 192.168.1.232. Now I need a little bit more than the IP address, and if I pull the manual back into view here, what I can find out is that the way you configure that IP address is down here under the configuring of the communication settings. I'm sorry, under the down here a little bit further in the main driver sheet, configuring the driver worksheets. And when we set up that station, it's a little bit more than the IP address. It's the IP address, a colon, then the port number, then the PLC ID number, or the node number. For most Modbus TCP connections, the port number is 502. I'm not sure how they settled on that, but it is. And then the PLC that I happen to be using is station number 1. So we're going to go back in and configure that. So here it's colon 502 and then colon 1. And now the PLC address that we're going to communicate with is the first holding register in that PLC. And I just have a kind of a free running counter that's counting up in that PLC. And the addressing scheme, let me pull this back into view here in the help system. The addressing is based on the memory type, and we're going to use the 4X type, or the memory type 4, or holding register. And what we do is we put that in this worksheet, so the 4X. In this case, we're going to talk to 40,001 register, so 4X colon 1 is the equivalent of 4,001, 40,001, or 400,001. Depends on the type of PLC that you're communicating with and how you have that set up. So again, that's memory type 4, offset of 1. What I learned is 40,001. So that's how we tied to this IP address. The PLC is at that IP address, that port, and that station number. This holding register within that PLC all ties to this tag. Now we're going to come back and talk about these fields in the header right now. They're not necessary, they're not required. They're highly recommended that you take a look at these statuses, and we'll come back and configure those in a second. So I'm going to now I'm going to save this driver worksheet now that we have temperature tied to 40,001, and we're going to save that. And now what I'm going to do is I have an HMI offline that I'm going to bring online and then bring into view here so that you can see it, and I'll download to that remotely and bring up a remote desktop connection. Alright, so I have that device online now. What I'm going to do is go here to my Home tab. I'm going to go to Connect, and I'm going to type in the IP address of that device. Now, how to set up this remote connection is covered in another video, so I'm not going to cover it here. That particular HMI is at 192.168.1.3. I'm going to go ahead and connect to that now, and you can see that I'm connected here. I'm going to go to Project, and I'm going to put in a new path here. I did a driver test earlier. Let's create a new path for driver 1. Say OK, and I'll go into that folder, and so that's a folder I want to download this project to, and I'll go ahead and download that. And because I don't remember if I set this up here under graphics, I'm going to go set that as startup, and now I should be able to run that project. I'm going to bring this into view here. It's warning me that I don't have a license, and here's my connection. And why don't I have connection there? What's the problem here? I'm not quite sure, so let's take that back out of view here. Let's stop the project. Let's go back here into communications, and I have 192.168.1.32 and port 502, port 1 or station 1. I'm going to see if I can ping that address. So it's ping 192.168.1.232, and I can ping it. Oh, I know why. I've actually taken the PLC offline, so let me pause the video for just a second. I'll bring that back online, and see if we can't ping it again. Alright, so now I have the PLC online. I should be able to repeat that ping, and there we go. I have a reply from it. I'll get rid of that. I'll bring this into view here, and I will start my project again. This is a remote desktop connection to a remote HMI that I have, and I can either start it from that HMI or I can run it from my development system here. And I'll do the run here, and I've lost focus, so let me bring that back. Alright, so here you go. Now I have that on screen, and you can see that it's counting up from the PLC. And if I was to I'll move that off of screen here. If I go back into the screen and I set this up to be input enabled, then I can change the value in the PLC. I'll save the changes, and I'll download that. So that downloads, and I'll bring that in here. And now I should be able to change that. Right now it's counting up every few seconds. That's not the rate of the driver. This happens to be in the counter, and the PLC is just counting up every, I forget what it is, 3 or 4 seconds or so. So there's 34, 35, and if I wanted to, I can come in here and set this at 10, and you can see the value in that bar graph changes, and then it still continues to count up. So you can see that I'm communicating to that PLC. So again, let me take that offline here, and let's stop this. So that stopped the remote connection. Notice I'm here in the remote management, and I'll go back into the main driver sheet. Now we'll talk a little bit more in detail about the main driver sheet and the standard driver sheet in the next video, but I wanted to talk about these fields here. This disable, if I put a constant in here of 1, or however this field evaluates to true, I could have a tag or some expression in here. It would disable this worksheet. So I could put some tag name in here that would shut this down if I wanted to temporarily, or enable it. If it's enabled by default, it scans every 600 milliseconds. That is changeable. But for now, again, it's default at 600 milliseconds. I'm going to fill out these status fields. I'm going to make 4 tags here. RDCP for read completed. That's going to be a Boolean type address. I'm just going to hit the letter B here. And the write complete, that's also going to be a Boolean type address. Now those are going to toggle every time there's a read or a write, and I'll explain that in a little bit. I'll put those on the screen. Now the read status and the write status will give me typically a 0, depending on the driver, but typically a 0 if it's communicating good. If it's a non-zero value, it will give me some error code in there that's described in the manual, and I'll show that to you here in a second. So here's read status, and this one, unlike the completed, it's not going to be a Boolean, it's going to be an integer, and then the write status will also be an integer as well. And so now I can use those tags and put those on my screen. Go back here to graphics, I'll double click. And what I'm going to do is put reads complete. I'll just abbreviate that, and I'll put a single character there for read complete. And I'll apply a text data link. That's the same as going up here. And again, we'll get into that when we get into animation video. And that tag will be, so I don't have to remember it, read complete. And then I'll copy that down by holding my control key on my keyboard. And I'll change this tag to be write complete, and change the text to be write. Oops, if I could spell here. And then I'm going to make a similar one for status, read status, which will be to the RDST tag. And we'll go back to the text, and this will be status here. And we'll copy this down, and this will be the write status. And the text data link will be the write status tag. Okay, so now how do these work? Now that we have these in the, I'll have to download those to my remote HMI. I will launch that. Now that we have these running, I can see how they're going to act and react. And looks like I don't have my new tag, so let me stop that. And I will download the project to it, which will get my four new tags there. I will run this and switch over to this. Now it's going to show me that I have a demo license running, and I have something else going on. So here you can see, let me change this value so it doesn't go off the top. Now you can see that the read complete is toggling approximately every 600 milliseconds or so. Depends on how fast the screen can keep up. So every time this reads from the PLC, that's going to toggle. And since I wrote to this address one time, it toggled from a 0 to a 1. Notice that the write complete is not toggling like the read is. That's because I'm not doing a whole succession of writes. It will toggle back to 0 if I change the value again. Let's say I set it to 5. Watch the write complete. It changes one time. So I can use that to tell how often I'm reading or writing, or when I'm reading and writing, and I can use that to my advantage. Notice that the statuses are currently 0, and that means I have good communications. And if I go take my PLC offline, that will go through the retry period, and then I will get some type of read status. And you can also see that I get question marks here. And what's happening here is, let me take this off the screen here. And what's going on here is under the project settings in the viewer, we have this set up to show question marks when quality is not good. That means that rather than showing an incorrect value that's not realistic, we show question marks instead. So that's by design. Otherwise, if you uncheck that, it'll show you the last value that it had for the tag. Then we can go over here to the manual again, and I can bring these error codes, and those are usually down towards the bottom of the manual here, depending on the manual, depending on the driver, and you can see the different error codes that are reported. So a lot of times what you'll get is a connection error, and you can try to ping. The way that I took that one offline, it tried to do some kind of illegal function code. So depending on what's happening here, it'll report back the particular error code, and you can use that to troubleshoot your connection. But you saw how I used the ping to try to troubleshoot that earlier. Okay, so let's go back in here and talk about the main driver sheet and what's the difference briefly between the main driver sheet and the standard driver sheet. The main driver sheet, you can mix and match memory types in here, and talk to different PLCs, talk to different addresses within that PLC. In this case, it's a holding register. You could put coils in here, inputs, outputs, depends on what you want to. Basically, you can put any type of I/O address in there. Notice that we have these 4 status fields. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a standard driver sheet. So here's the standard driver sheet, and notice that it still has those 4 status fields, but in addition to that, it has these triggering fields. And essentially what you can do now is instead of automatically triggering this, you have to tell it when to trigger. You can tell it with these 2 triggering fields when to trigger, and essentially what you're going to do is put tags in here that will be toggling. Anytime within InTouch Machine Edition, you're going to see this trigger word, and this means that anytime the value in this field changes, doesn't have to go just from 0 to 1 or 1 to 0. It could be from 55 to 56 or from 100 to 200. Anytime it changes, it will cause that to trigger. So with these 2 fields, you can independently trigger when this worksheet, this entire worksheet, is going to read. You can independently trigger when it's going to write, or depending on how you use these 2 fields, you can tell it to read when idle or write whenever there's a tag change. So if some tag changes in this entire worksheet, it'll cause the entire worksheet to write. So here what we're going to do is a lot of times what people will do will be to just put ones in there, put constant ones in there so that it will read and write whenever there's an update. Now this, unlike the main driver sheet, the station field is not in the worksheet, it's up here in the header. And if we put in here the 192.168.232:502:1, and then up here we're going to put the beginning part of the address. If you wanted to talk to 40,001, up here you would put, let's say, 4x:0, and then if we had another tag in here, pressure, which I don't have in my project yet, then over here I would just put the offset from that. So maybe that's 40,002. So this is the same thing as putting 40,002, which will go to my second word in my PLC, my second holding register in the PLC. So back here we had 40,001 for temperature. Over here we have 40,002. Now this is done as kind of like Modbus is written. This is memory type 4 with an offset of 0, and this is an offset of 2 from that. So hopefully everybody understands that, because that idea is used throughout this product. So we'll talk more about drivers in detail in the drivers too, but I did also want to bring up the help and show you a little diagram as to what we just did here. If I go into the help system, go into introduction, internal structure, and data flow, we covered a little bit about this in the tags section. I had put a bar graph and a data display on the screen, and that's on the viewer. The screens are run by the viewer, and the viewer communicates through this TCP/IP server into the tags. So I have that tag called temperature on the screen, and then I have a bar graph and a data display, an entry on the screen. When I changed the value in that data display, it wrote to the tag. The tag then went back and updated the bar graph, and then when I eventually added the driver in, the MOTCP or the Modbus TCP driver, the driver was updating the tag, which was then in turn updating the screen. So that's kind of the flow of how things are happening, and we'll get into more of the configuration, a little bit more details in the drivers 2 video. So moving back to the presentation here. So if you have any other questions or would like to dig up some more information, you can always take a look at the training. You can look at the training blog and the development network, depending on what access you have on the Wonderware website. So we'd like to thank you for your attention. Hopefully you learned something, and we'll see you in the next video.